Welcome to Innovation in Government, DevSecOps, Platform Engineering, Cyber Resilience, and the Future of Mission Delivery, presented by Carahsoft. I'm your host, George Jackson. In just the past 5 years, DevSecOps has evolved from a conceptual add-on to an essential practice for nearly every stage of software development. DevSecOps leaders tell me agencies increasingly experiment with AI, automation, and data intelligence to take things to the next level. On this program, you'll meet some of the DevSecOps leaders behind that effort, from the Department of Transportation, the U.S. Marine Corps, the Army, Navy, and more. Learn about their work to streamline operations, improve service delivery, and support mission-critical functions. This episode of Innovation in Government starts right now. Anil Chaudhry is Senior Advisor for Artificial Intelligence, Autonomy, and National Security at the Department of Transportation. Anil, always great sitting down with you, sir.
Same here, yes.
So you got some notes. You're headed up on stage in a bit, talking a bit about AI and DevSecOps, the nexus between the two. Give us a primer.
So first of all, you pointed out these notes, right? So I'd like to say I'm probably the least intelligent person in the room. And what I like to do is make sure I have these notes so that I stay on point and I don't get fired by my bosses by the time I get home.
Well, let's hope that's not the case. Talk to me a little bit about that connection between AI, autonomy, national security, and what we're here to cover today, DevSecOps.
So, in the past few years, especially with the mass introduction of large language models and generative AI in our daily lives, the world has changed. And what we're starting to see in places like, Ukraine, in Iran, even in places like Sudan, is commercial products are now being used in warfare. These are products that were designed for commercial use. They are now being deployed in a new novel way. And the challenge that we face, as Americans is we want to be innovative. And we want to make sure that Americans are always on the forefront of technology. But we also, because we are a democratic society, right, we need to have ways to make sure that we can hold our leadership accountable, right? So that's where, the stuff that I think about 3 to 5 years from now is, what does dual use technology look like? What does autonomy look like? And I'll give you a good use case. We have autonomous vehicles, which everybody's familiar with, and some of them have really nice features where you could take your hands off the steering wheel. And then you have others that, have automatic emergency braking that stop you from, hitting other cars on the road when you're distracted, or, they have the sensors on the side that stop you from changing a lane unless you give a signal. And that is great. But for first responders, sometimes first responders actually do need to break traffic laws to get somewhere. A police vehicle might have to ram into another vehicle in order to stop it. And ambulance might need to jump a curb to get to where it needs because traffic is stopped. Or a fire truck may need to actually go down a wrong way down a one-way street in order to do something. But with all the autonomous systems built into commercial vehicles, what we're finding sometimes is these things become a hazard for first responders, especially when they're responding to an emergency, not when they're doing their day-to-day. So how do we build in, things in our autonomous systems, processes where either through flicking a switch where it says once you turn the siren on, all the autonomy now goes into a different risk model so that, we can ram cars as opposed to it won't let you hit something, or go down a one-way street. And what is that trigger for that? And, so it's things like that we have to start thinking about. It's, drones that are really great in for doing house inspections, for firefighting, and I do know from my colleagues, in California, some of the more forward-looking police departments, what they do is, when they get a 911 emergency call, for instance, the first thing they do is dispatch a drone so that as the situation is evolving, they know exactly what's on ground and they know whether or not they have to send a SWAT team or they have to send other assets to the site. They can do all that as opposed to getting on site, then determining what they need, right? So there are some very good use cases for commercial equipment, but how do you tie that into national security and also into, what, when we think about warfare, what that means? And how do you manage all that? Those are some harder questions because, Department of Transportation is one of those interesting spaces where we build things, right? We regulate things that are physical in nature,
Yeah.
that move fast enough that cause damage. A truck, 80,000-pound truck is a physical object. If it's not managed well, it causes really catastrophic things. Things falling out of the sky are catastrophic. So our risk calculus is different because we are talking about software that manages physical things as opposed to software that just manages digital things.
Talk about the role DevSecOps plays in that push for autonomy, by industry and where DOT and other government agencies have to lean in and have an active role. How is DevSecOps involved, sir?
Yeah, so that's, something that, even my colleagues have been thinking a lot about, especially from, the CISO and from, our chief product and technology officers that deliver applications in DOT is really about how the DevSecOps model should evolve in the age of agentic AI. Now, DevSecOps, traditionally has been a deterministic, static, script-based orchestration. We have rules. If X does, if we do X, we do Y. We sort of have infrastructure as code where we just pull in third-party dependencies from open source libraries, and it's a very linear scan sort of process where we have rules, triggers, maybe a little bit of machine learning, and that's typically how we manage security within the development, security operation sort of life cycle. But when we start thinking about, vibe coding and we think about all these new ways of building applications, what we need to consider first and foremost is we're moving from a deterministic way of doing things, rule-based things to a probabilistic way of doing things. So the large language models are great in what they do, because they're just playing probabilities. But what that also means is that 2 years from now, or even tomorrow, if you run the same problem through the same large language model, you may get an answer that is similar but not the same. So how do you manage, application development and security when you have a probabilistic, dynamic, goal-oriented decision-making tool? And by that, what I mean, it's really about application as code. You have dynamic prompting. You're telling the application what to do, not how to do it, right? And then all of a sudden, what you're doing is thinking about, instead of linear scans, sort of looping continuous scans and building upon finding that zero-day exploit that nobody thought about and really pushing through that, punching through that. So how do you really think your application development, when it's no longer a brittle application, it's just a probabilistic application where you're telling, a large language model to accomplish an objective, and you don't even know how that objective is being accomplished. And how do we evolve what is the role of humans there? How do we start to oversee code that may be so complex that we cannot even understand it? The machine understands it, but do we understand it enough to be able to correct the machine.
And at least we understand the goals of moving from deterministic to probabilistic better after this interview with Anil Chaudhry, sir. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Kevin Whittle is Principal Solution Engineer over at Microsoft. Sir, thanks so much for taking time out of the DevSecOps Conference to sit down with me. Good to have you.
Good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm always happy to discuss the field and give my information and what I can do to help the process moving forward for those who are looking into it.
Well, let's get into it. You know, something that you said really stuck in my head before the cameras got rolling here. You mentioned that AI doesn't replace DevSecOps. What does that mean to you?
It really means if you don't have good processes in place, if you don't have guardrails, if you haven't put in governance, if you don't have responsibility zones, if you haven't set up templates for how you're going to deploy, how you're going to build, AI won't fix that. It will can actually make your problems worse. As people have found, errors or bugs in their code has been exposed. A lot of that is they don't have good processes in place, and they're thinking that AI can skip ahead. And it's a tool, it's an enhancement, but it's not a replacement for good processes, for good procedures, and for good people. So again, it doesn't replace, it enhances. And if you think of it as it's going to be a golden bullet and it will solve all my problems, you're going to be wrong.
So flip that for me, Kevin. If you do have good governance, you do have good processes in place around the concept of DevSecOps, how does AI serve as a force multiplier for an organization?
That's absolutely the way to look at it. Because if you think about it, if you have the documentation of your processes in there, you can ground your AI on that. So it uses your procedures. It uses your templates. It uses the things that you have to meet as part of DoD, well, a part of government. You have rules and regulations which the general population, the general companies don't have. And if you have those things documented, and if you ground your AI on that, you're going to have much better results from it, and you will get more value out of it. So again, that means you've already done the hard work. You already have the DevSecOps in place, and you're going to add this on an enhancement. It's not a replacement, it's an enhancement to it, but it means you've already done the hard work, and then you put this in here.
Are there other elements to an organization using AI and using its relationship with DevSecOps responsibly? I realize that's a broad question, but what are some of the key ingredients to responsible use?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, there are a lot of, when you talk about responsible use, there are a lot of things involved in there. AI, depending on how it's trained and the tools that you're using on there, can have bias in there. And so you need to be aware of that, which is why you always have to have someone to review whatever comes in there. So if you go in there and thinking that AI is always right, and it's automatically something I can accept, you're going to run into problems. You have to understand the biases that each model has and how that impacts the results that are coming out of there. There are other biases that can come in there too, because if it's not trained on the right material or it's not trained on your materials, the responses that can come out of it can be completely correct, but they're wrong for your organization because you're government, because you can't use these types of technologies. You can't use this type of information in your result. So again, you have to understand all of those things. And again, that means good DevSecOps is the foundation of being successful with your AI.
You mentioned culture earlier, Kevin. I wonder, in your broad view, across the department, as you mentioned, or all of government, what are some of the common cultural barriers organizations face in doing this the right way?
There's a few things in there. Partly it's new, right? And there is in the government, sometimes if it's new, we don't want to be the first ones out of the gate using it. And I can understand that. You don't want to be the one who's on the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal because you had a spillage, because you let out secrets that shouldn't have been out there. So that's understandable. The other is there's a cost aspect of it, and you're wondering, is it worth what I'm going to spend on it? And again, you've seen companies go out there who went all in, and just said we want to use it 100% for everything, even though it didn't make any sense, and to see the bills on that. So there is a good reason to be a little bit concerned about it. Is it how it's going to work in my culture? Can we accept it? Are we going to do the things we need to do, the training that goes behind it? Have we documented our processes and procedures? Or are we just going to drop it in there like other technologies, and then it doesn't get used and we don't get the value out of it? So it's a valid concern, but it comes down to, have you done the groundwork to make it successful in your organization? And if you haven't done that, you probably aren't successful in many areas anyway, and it's just going to be on top of the problems that you already have.
Kevin, I want to close with almost a balance question. In these efforts by agencies to automate, one of the big goals is being more efficient, moving faster, getting better data and insights to the edge. I mean, these are real, tangible things with mission-oriented benefits for organizations, but doing so responsibly also means a certain level over controls, verification. How do organizations strike that right balance between moving fast and doing things in a responsible way?
That's a very good question too, because again, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, that you're improving our processes, that you're getting better results at that. And that means going into it, you have to come up with the metrics that make sense for your organization, what success looks like. Because if you haven't defined what success is, none of this will matter. You won't be able to tell that you've improved. You won't be able to tell where you need to focus on. So you have to come in there, and there are a lot of companies that can help you do that. Come in there and define what success means, and then you can measure that. And once you've done that, you're down the road of where you need to go.
Kevin Whittle, Principal Solution Engineer over at Microsoft. Sir, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Always great sitting down with Dave Raley, Chief Digital Services Officer for Operation StormBreaker USMC. Dave, how you been?
Good. Thank you for having me on again. It's good to see you, Joe.
So talk to me about some trend lines relative to DevSecOps for the department, maybe Operation StormBreaker specifically. Where are you seeing folks lean in right now?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good thing for us to have a conversation around DevSecOps, but I want to reorient it around mission context. One of the reasons DevSecOps is so important, you're not going to be able to do iterative and agile software development deployment without the platform and capability that DevSecOps will bring for you. It's a really critical component. I think that might be often missed around the kind of the label of DevSecOps and kind of that as a capability. In the end, it's meant to enable quickly building and delivering working software to the warfighter in the case of the DOW context. I think you have to think about a couple of things of why does that matter. Well, one of the reasons is that we are operating now in a global space where digital is almost ubiquitous with warfare now. So there's no way to kind of separate the two.
Yeah.
And then the cycle times in which we can build and deploy and release software is going to directly correlate into advantage in the strategic continuum. And so how do we outpace the adversary on faster cycle times of building, deploying, and releasing? Well, one of the things, taking a waterfall approach to both development and acquisition and implementation, and then bolting on the cybersecurity at the end, doing all those pieces separately creates those 4 or 5 year cycle times for building, click level requirements of system shall statements in a spreadsheet that we end up soliciting to somebody and say, please build this with sprints. Well, okay, but you haven't actually iteratively developed and built capability working with a product owner, et cetera, that allowed you to actually take a working proof of concept, properly secured, and put it into production and get real user feedback, iterate on later that day and release a build, right?
Yeah.
So those two things are very much different. DevSecOps is the capability that's supporting the underpinning of that dev and the security baked in and the operations all working together concertedly in a concerted way that allows you to iterate and build. The industry's been doing this for a lot of years. There's starting to be a lot of that interest and push inside the DOW. The DOW CIO's office now several years ago had released DevSecOps guidance. Our friend George Lamb and his team have kind of led implementing and setting the stage for capabilities like Operation StormBreaker to be successful. So we constructed Operation StormBreaker cloud native based off of those principles from the DOW CIO's office for both DevSecOps and CATO on purpose, because understanding that if you don't have the platform to do dev and all the way into production and you don't address the security aspects, you're not going to be able to deliver that software at the speed of relevance for the warfighter. Does that make sense?
One reason, Dave, I've always found Operation StormBreaker so interesting is I feel like what you've helped to build over there and spearhead is very scalable, you know, for the U.S. Marine Corps, possibly for the department. Like long term, there's a lot of lessons learned there, and I think one of them is around the culture, the people, the way folks collaborate in sort of this DevSecOps methodology. Give me a best practice or two for other organizations that are really interested in, you know, building a more agile, more modular open systems approach to their architectures going forward. What do you got to do relative to the culture there?
Maybe I'll just tease with this, and the audience can take a look and do some digging on their own. I think there's a particular role that would be a major shift in the Department of War if we started to identify product owners. A product owner, if you really truly understand that what that is kind of central to the idea of doing agile development and DevSecOps. Having a single person that's representing the business that can guide the direction of whatever system we're developing and ensure it's doing throughout the entire product lifecycle, right? Projects have a problem from the outset because by definition, they have a start and a stop date. And a product should exist as long as it's providing value to whatever mission or business outcome you're trying to achieve. And so I think let's start centering ourselves around start creating product-centric cultures, which means we are driven by outcomes, right? We're not driven by POAMs and dates and click-level requirements. We're trying to achieve a mission outcome. How do they achieve that mission outcome? And orient teams around the mission outcomes as opposed to around a project or whatever the case there. So that would be maybe one thing to start teasing out of saying that's a key culture component, because when you start doing that, things organizations start to naturally coalesce a little bit differently as you start to introduce that mindset.
Dave Raley, always a pleasure. Dr. Matthew Graviss, Public Sector CTO over at Atlassian. Sir, thanks so much for being here.
Thrilled to be with you, George.
So before we get into DevSecOps, the real meat and focus of our conversation, talk about that public sector CTO role. What's your background and why is Atlassian unique in this marketplace?
Yeah, I spent nearly 20 years in the federal government, largely in Homeland Security, doing hardware, software, integrated systems, things like that, and then got more into the software development, the data analytics, artificial intelligence through higher level roles in Homeland Security, and then was the Chief Data and AI Officer at the State Department for the last 5 years. And then about a year and a half ago, left to join Atlassian. I'm a systems engineer by trade, and so I'm always thinking about how things work. And in the case of Atlassian, I think our unique value proposition is 20 plus years of very detailed art and science kind of knowledge around how teams can collaborate effectively. So that was a natural fit for me as a systems guy to jump into that fold and take both the public sector experience that I had and the offerings and the experience that Atlassian has across all agencies in government.
I want to dig into some of the teamwork aspects there that you tease out. Before we get there, based on that 20 years of experience, DevSecOps as a field, how has it changed in the recent part of that history? You know, the past 3-5 years, how does DevSecOps look different than it did before?
Certainly, AI has changed the game in a pretty dramatic way, and I think there's teams are moving really fast and learning quickly and adapting quickly, and we've certainly seen that. I have the benefit and fortune of being able to engage executives across the public sector in technology roles. I also get to do some of the work on the private sector side, and it's a really great community to be able to engage. what I would say is AI has evolved from, oh, we have ChatGPT, now we have chatbots, let's build our own chatbots so that our employees can benefit from chatting with AI inside our organizations, to now we're in this wave of where I knew we would get to even when I was at the State Department, which is like, how do you acquire software with AI embedded in the workflows that employees are using every single day? What you don't want is that context switching that is happening in a lot of agencies right now, where employees are using certain tools for different workflows, and then they're going to an AI solution that was built in the department to benefit from AI, and then coming back to the tools that they're operating in. So it's like, how do you have AI native to the tools that you're operating? I think that's the shift over the last year that agencies are really starting to move. And I think we're going to see more and more of that over the next few years.
You've managed those teams, internal to government, now external to government. There's a lot of collaboration involved in DevSecOps. For those teams specifically, are there things that make them successful? Are there common traits or approaches that really make DevSecOps work?
100%. And again, I get to engage so many different customers, but the company, having been around for 20 plus years, started getting asked questions from customers about how do teams collaborate to optimize mission outcomes. And so it actually resulted in the company creating what we call the Teamwork Lab, which is a bunch of research scientists that are focused on high-performing teams. And so through my own experience and through theirs, what we've determined is there's a few focus areas that highly effective teams do well. One is aligning work to goals. It's amazing the number of strategies that are produced in government at a high level that have a great looking cover, that have 4 goals and some objectives underneath. I'm guilty of this too, by the way.
Love a great looking cover.
Right? And then it goes down to a working level, and they look up and they at that strategy and they say, where do I fit into this? And that's a product of lacking that connectivity up and down an organization, so that each employee within a DevSecOps organization can actually understand how their day-to-day work is aligning to the things that the CIO is talking with the secretary about, that they're communicating to the public as a new citizen service that they're contributing to. Figuring out that alignment is really, really important. And it's a really fast-growing part of the Atlassian platform, is this what we call the strategy collection, the ability to connect strategy all the way down to the epics and stories in Jira that developer teams are using every single day.
Yeah. Talk to me about the coding aspect of those types of initiatives. Coders need to do what they do best. How do you free them up to code the living daylights out of stuff?
It's amazing. So when I was at the State Department, we used a program called the U.S. Digital Corps and brought in a number of aspiring technologists, data scientists, engineers into the government who had no public sector background. And you could ask any of them what their biggest surprise was when joining the government, and it was, man, I wish I had more time to actually do coding than being in more meetings and doing more discovery and doing more testing and all these other things that surround code development within the software development lifecycle. That becomes really important. So what Atlassian has really focused on from a platform standpoint is, yes, we have coding agents, but how do we build agents to accelerate the discovery process? How do we build agents that can accelerate the requirements development, the design process, the testing process, so that our approach is to take the entire software development lifecycle and embed AI agents with certain skills throughout the lifecycle, rather than just focusing on code assist. And we can see that there's a dramatic shift in organizational outcomes, not just individual productivity, when an agency or a company starts to tackle it more holistically.
Dr. Matthew Graviss over at Atlassian. Sir, thanks so much.
Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Rosie Bauer is Assistant Deputy for Data, Engineering, and Software at ASALT. Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition Logistics and Technology. For those in the audience there, Rosie, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking DevSecOps today. Cultural shift more than anything. What does that look like inside of your part of the Army, ma'am?
Yes, so historically, DevSecOps, a couple of years ago when we were going down this digital transformation journey, DevSecOps actually helped us modernize software, right? So we went from almost that stale monolithic way of delivering software to getting software out in the field very quickly on a continuous basis. So fast forward to now, we're realizing that we can push DevSecOps beyond the software boundary and actually apply it across our engineering processes, right? And that's very critical because right now, in order for us to adapt and really get the latest and greatest commercial capabilities out into the field, it's speed of adaptation. And for that, the baseline, the core for that is the DevSecOps pipeline, having that pipeline, those principles which allow for continuation integration, automation, and truly integrating security into that pipeline and applying it across the entire acquisition lifecycle. But really, what makes that possible is that digital engineering ecosystem. And that digital engineering ecosystem is what helps us federate that data and really create those models to allow us to really get to that continuous delivery and making sure that the latest and greatest capabilities are in the hand of our soldiers.
It sounds like what you're moving toward is more of a MOSA, modular open systems architecture model. Am I reading that right?
Yes, absolutely. So MOSA is very critical. MOSA is going to get us to the modularity that we need, which is going to speed up integration. That's important because what we want is we want the ability to, and I'll just use a simple word, plug and play, swap in and out, right? So, and that's important. We want to make sure that we have the ability to get the latest commercial technology and government solutions into the hands of soldiers, quick swapping in and out. We want to speed up procurement. We want to speed up and we want to make them secure as well. And so having MOSA, and it's not just MOSA, right? So having a mature MOSA architecture is important. And in order for us to get there, the key is going to be having stable interfaces. So having those stable interfaces and as well as being able to have those clear boundaries is what's going to get us to the modularity that we need. So once we get to that modularity, now we can isolate those components that need to be upgraded, right? So now we can isolate what we test, what we validate, and what needs to get out into field quicker. And it also helps from an ATO perspective, a certification. We don't have to now certify the entire enterprise, right? Now we scope that down, and that piece, that component that changes in the architecture is what we need to recertify. And so that now closes the gap between procurement and operationalization.
It's a difficult word to say, operationalization. There's several of them, but let's focus on another difficult word, digitization. You might not be doing that sort of authorization for the entire enterprise, but digitizing the entire enterprise is critical. Why?
So historically, we're all very aware of, right? The enterprise, the acquisition is very documented, heavy process and very siloed. So when you think about requirements, when you think about architecture, when you think about tests, those are very documented, heavy-based processes that occur individually in a very siloed type of way. And so things like that, those type of processes are not going to allow us to take advantage of DevSecOps type of principles. So we can't go fast. But if we take those artifacts and we make them machine readable, data and code, it's a game changer, right? Now we can take that, digitize them in a digital engineering environment. Now we can take advantage of the DevSecOps pipeline. That's what's going to allow us to be able to automate. That's going to allow us to do that continuous integration. And it's going to allow us to get to that security and embed that into the pipeline that we need. And that's going to speed up and allow us to get the latest and greatest capabilities in the hands of our soldiers.
Getting that capability into the hands of your soldiers is a much more tailored set of goals than it possibly ever used to be. The battlefield is really dynamic. The acquisition landscape needs to be faster and faster because software changes so quickly. How challenging is that, Rosie? And like, what is the Army doing to make things move at that rapid speed that's demanded from the top levels of the department?
So I think that's where things like open standards comes into effect. API that helps expose what those interfaces look like to both our internal and external partners. And what that does is it essentially provides the blueprints of our architecture. So it allows our commercial partners, it gives them the ability to, oh, okay, this is what I have to build towards. And what that does is it allows them to now, once the interfaces are stable, now they know what to build towards. Those boundaries are clear, and it speeds up that procurement process. And that was clear when, for example, Operation Jailbreak, right? In Operation Jailbreak, if it's one thing that it proved that with API that drives integration, exposed interfaces, we were able to bring in multiple vendors, multiple different solutions, integrate them in an extremely fast time frame, and those types of integrated solutions are able to get into the field at a much quicker rate, faster than ever before.
Talking the push for DevSecOps, MOSA, and speed with Rosie Bauer over at ASALT. Ma'am, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Steve Stemmer, FedCiv Mission Support Director over at ChainGuard. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about DevSecOps.
Sure.
I want to start with, I guess I'll call it the underlying infrastructure layer. What does that phrase mean to you, and what's the latest and greatest in DevSecOps relative to underlying infrastructure?
Yeah, I think of a couple of different things that have really impacted DevSecOps or perhaps helped create DevSecOps best practices, and one of those is open source software. And the other is containerization. So Kubernetes and Docker, what they have done for the world and the speed with which you can now build and deploy and ship software in small bite sizes in secure manners has really fundamentally changed how we can build software for the mission.
The use of open source software by the government has exploded. What kind of challenges has that introduced for public sector organizations?
Yeah, there's many challenges it has produced, and in particular, vulnerabilities. So security vulnerabilities, making it into open source code. Oftentimes, open source software has a few small individuals or groups or single individuals that are the creators of the open source software. And part of the challenges to that is what you want to be doing as a creator and maintainer of good OSS is that, hey, I want to get out features and enhancements. What is often underlying is there's a security and vulnerability landscape that can be exposed. And so who's left holding the bag to be able to secure open source software, but the folks that now then download and then try to use it into their production systems. So the challenge within the DevSecOps landscape for those that are bringing in open source components, which to be clear is everybody, it's probably a single organization that is building and shipping software not using open source, is now how do we bring that into our security posture, and how do we create a baseline for assuming risk, in particular in the government context? How do we go out and get an ATO, or how do we FedRAMP a product that we have built?
Steve, before the cameras got rolling, you used a word, I think it's good to introduce it at this point in our conversation, transparency. Both transparency in the process, but also transparency in the technology. It's a big word, it's a broad word. Draw that out of the ether for me. What does transparency mean for DevSecOps? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I think transparency is incredibly important with regard to how does the government authorize software that's being built and deployed into mission. And I think there's three areas in particular. One is, what are we actually looking at? What is being built? So what is our software bill of material? Two is, what's our risk exposure? So what are the vulnerabilities that are in our softwares? There is some level of inherent risk acceptance that any authorizing official will do. And then third is the provenance. Who owns each of the security risks and capabilities that are identified and found. So the provenance then becomes kind of the third leg of the stool that needs to be really looked at in terms of how do we understand and buy into what good transparency looks like.
What has artificial intelligence done to open source? And I realize probably a laundry list there. Big 2 or 3 trends. How is AI impacting open source?
Yeah, I'll just tell you the biggest thing I think on my mind that we see right now that AI is impacting open source software in a really, really big way. Capabilities of next-gen models like Mythos that have yet to be released but are out there in the wild. Nation-state adversaries have access to these things. What that is doing is creating a lot of automation in how adversaries and cyber threat actors are finding vulnerabilities in all sorts of software, not just open source software, but in particular, what's easy to access is what's available, and that's the open source world. And so what's accelerating is the amount of malicious code now that can make it into these open source packages that an unassuming developer or engineer or even government agency as a whole may now download into their environment. And if we don't have a strong security posture up front about starting our security posture from the beginning as opposed to towards the end of the development cycle, risk and the attack surface will begin to explode.
Steve, I want to close on a culture question. You've been in this DevSecOps, this open source landscape for a number of years, but it has developed incredibly rapidly over just the past few, for all of the reasons we discussed today. What goes into a good team in DevSecOps? What's the new elements that organizations should focus on there?
Yeah, culture is really, really important. I think it's a great topic to dive into. Security needs to make it into the process early in the cycle, right? If not at stage 1. Oftentimes what we see out there is that security is kind of the afterthought. It's at the end of the development cycle that we're thinking about, oh, okay, I have to now go out and get my security authorization or my FedRAMP. We better call the security guys and begin to show them what we built. So really, security needs to be a part of the conversation and the culture early on. 2 is talking about and enabling DevSecOps teams with best-in-breed tools. That often means enabling somebody use what they are comfortable using or what they maybe want to use, which is often against the grain of what is, quote unquote, an approved list of tools or resources, especially inside of a federal government program. So part of the culture needs to be allow developers and engineers to use best-in-breed tools that they can select from without a huge security burden placed around them or restriction placed around them.
Steve Stemmer over at ChainGuard. Sir, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Always great sitting down with Justin Finelli, CTO, Department of the Navy. Good to see you again, sir.
Good to see you, George.
So DevSecOps, as far as initiatives, Navy is a leader. Talk about some of the areas where you're pushing the envelope in DevSecOps.
I think we've come a long way. And so we started at Wild West, which is one way to get the workforce involved. And so if you had a DevSecOps tool or environment, you stood it up, and we had dozens of those. And that got people in the game, but it wasn't as organized or as fast, frankly, as we needed it to be. And so we've recently, our office designated an enterprise service. So Orion is the go-to DevSecOps pipeline. There are others for kind of niche capabilities, but to have one tried and true best of breed path is exceptionally helpful. And then kind of funneling the developers, we have 25,000 who are already in there using that. To one place as opposed to having to learn a different set of tools for a different set of problems has been tremendously helpful. So point is, I'd say like going from unorganized or something short of chaos to a more organized funneled path is allowing us to channel energy to just harder problems.
What does that allow you to do relative to scale, Justin? I mean, you have this Wild West, you move it via Orion through a best in breed. Now, can you take that best in breed and scale it across the enterprise in a more effective way?
Yep. But actually, to that point, it cuts down on the overhead, kind of the context switching, all of this. But really, that's a matter of conversion. And so that matters most if we are delivering faster solutions and capabilities, right? If the first few weeks you were trying to figure out which tools you were using and then fixing integrations, as streamlined as that is, now the question is, are there places where we can solve a problem in 3 hours instead of 3 months? And so we're starting to build that catalog of let's embarrass the status quo. Let's show how much better we are than we were. Here was the baseline, and then here's the actuals. And so there were a couple cases where we said, hey, you're doing this task pretty quickly on the back end. How much time did that used to take? Well, let me go back and look. Oh, this used to take 70 hours, and now it's like fairly automated. Where that really translates for us is user time saved. And so our outcome-driven metrics, how much time on the back end are we saving users? That's where the effort of those 25,000 people translates into the difference that the Secretary has asked us to make and the difference that we're measuring for all the work that's going in. So the answer to your question is speed from idea to capability, and for getting rid of 20 different ways to solve the same problem. We want optionality, but we don't want to pay for optionality as a peanut butter spread. We want, here is the go-to, here's kind of the Pareto optimal path, and then here are some other options behind the scenes.
Are there high priority areas where the Don is applying DevSecOps specifically for cybersecurity? Are there things that stick out there?
Sure. So a couple things. First one is when you had 55 DevSecOps environments, then cybersecurity was harder, because that's a lot more footprint to secure, that's a lot more permutations of those different instances. Now we can get really good at the things that we do a lot of. And so as we train people, we are best in class at zero trust. Where we've applied zero trust, then it's a little bit less on the, here are the common mistakes, and then we've automated some of those. So how are we applying it to cybersecurity? The improved patching and the speed associated with that is something that everyone's kind of been indoctrinated into in the last 6 months, if they weren't already. And then the onboarding of new capability. So we have an incubator as a part of Orion. Hey, instead of just standing in the waiting room or purgatory for months and months and months, asking the same question different ways, you can go to the incubator, prove that out, move forward. So each of those pieces kind of, if you think about like cybersecurity as a pyramid, like it lowers the barrier of entry or improves cybersecurity on those most basic repeatable pieces.
Preparation and training for the workforce, as this has developed, how has that changed? Now that you're looking at Orion and best in breed and scaling that across the organization, do you have to focus on different things relative to prepping and training the workforce?
So when it was, hey, we are going to all commercial off the shelf for everything, then there's a lot of time spent on exploration. Everyone's kind of doing their own scouting. We have a commercial DevSecOps pipeline, and you have the cases where, hey, this is commercial first, there's something that clearly does that, or, oh, this is a very unique Navy or Marine Corps or DOW use case, and you need to develop something, or you'd need low code as opposed to vibe coding or something that comes out of DevSecOps or commercial. And so the point there is you're kind of starting on third base. And so like what that actually looks like is instead of like asking the first 17 questions on a questionnaire again and again, you mostly know where you are, and then you're channeling all of the effort of the workforce on, hey, yeah, we've learned all of those things. It's these 3 questions that you need to focus on. This is really good for both attracting and retaining good talent, because most people don't want to do those mind-numbing things. We had a hackathon that involved some development not long ago, and we had a 55-year-old there, and he said, this is the most energy I've had for my job in a long time, because now I can see the flash to bang. in a much shorter period of time. And so the point is, like, we're fairly clear on the problems, but instead of reinventing the wheel and all of its spokes, you're able to just kind of roll the wheel down the road. And there are any number of different ways we can talk about use cases that's happening, but like across the board, across our different portfolios and problem sets, that is the commonality that I've seen.
It's a fascinating evolution of DevSecOps at the Department of Navy. Great to sit down with CTO Justin Finelli, sir. Thanks so much.
Great to see you.
Mary Grace Wida is Federal Solutions Architect over at GitLab. MG, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start broad, okay? Automation, really important to accelerating delivery, reducing risk. Tease out 2 or 3 important elements there. What's big for GitLab?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at GitLab, one of the things that we've learned is that it's not enough to just automate parts of the software development process. So yes, we want to automate as much as possible to reduce human errors, to reduce the errors that result from manual processes. But if you don't have your artifacts, the evidence that you need for your ATO, in a place where you have everything together and it's auditable, it's traceable end-to-end across the entire product delivery lifecycle, then you're going to have a really hard time achieving a continuous ATO, for example. So yes, the automation factor is critical, but in addition to the automation, you also want to unify the evidence and unify the artifacts that are a part of getting to that ATO. And then the other thing that I would point out is the importance of having a strong foundation. So you want to have a platform approach. You want to have that foundation from an architecture and infrastructure perspective that will position you to be able to move faster, to be able to get the outcomes that we all talk about when we talk about DevSecOps. In order to be set up to be able to do that, the foundation is absolutely critical.
Let me pull a thread on that point relative to the foundation. You know, I've heard people use this phrase unified data model there before, and the word data seems really important in what you're talking about. Like, why is that? Why is the data so critical to the foundation? Like, what is it the foundation for?
Absolutely. So it's the foundation for not only faster collaboration, because you can have access to the full workflow context, but also for the ATO process, for audits. There's a range of use cases we could talk about, but I'll just walk through. I mean, starting from the planning and the requirements gathering at the very, very beginning of that workflow. Yeah. Then you're starting to write code, then you're starting to integrate your security tests, then you're going to deploy. Maybe you're deploying to one environment first before you promote to production. You want to have the ability to answer the questions, you know, who did what when? And you want to be able to point to that data and have that all accessible to you when somebody comes looking for it, or if you get asked about it in the future at any point. But going back to my first comment about enabling faster collaboration, that's also a benefit, because we talk about DevSecOps and making it easy for developers and security teams to work together to triage and remediate vulnerabilities. But in order for that to happen, there has to be a collaboration that occurs. Well, if you have everyone working from the same context, the same data, there's not going to be time wasted on, are we looking at the same spreadsheet? Are we looking at the same set of data? You're not going to waste time on those types of inefficiencies, because you're going to enable everyone to operate from the same context. And so that's really what the data provides as well, is that context that allows for the security team, if they have a question, they can dig deeper into the exact code, the commit, where that vulnerability was introduced. And they can see the entire chain of events that led to that breach. If that were to be what ended up happening and why they were looking into a particular finding further. And so that is the other benefit, is the context that data provides, and having that available in one place just simplifies the collaboration between different teams and different people, as well as enables you to get more useful output from AI. We all know that AI is only as good as the data, the context that it can access. And so if you're introducing AI into your environment that is siloed and fragmented, you've got people working out of multiple different versions of spreadsheets, you're gonna have a really hard time. You're gonna spend a lot of money on tokens, and you're gonna have a really hard time getting to a place where you are able to show a quantitative value and an ROI from that investment that you've made in that AI tooling. So I would say that that's another area where having that unified data and context is really important.
MG, I'm going to ask a question that might just have the most obvious answer ever. And I'm going to apologize for that in advance, but I want to connect two things that you raised, like real-time visibility is a phrase that came to mind as you were talking. And I wonder, when you raised the issue of security, why is that so important to have those two dynamics connected under DevSecOps? I mean, I would think the answer is you have a breach, you want teams to have the latest and greatest information right then, because every second counts. Am I reading that right?
Absolutely, but you also want to be able to know what are the current threats, what is our risk posture at this moment in time. So you don't want just insight at a particular point in time. You want to have that continuous visibility across your entire workflow, so that you can avoid that breach, to potentially get ahead of that, mitigate that risk, because you're aware of it. If you're not aware of it, there's nothing you could do to prevent it. And so having the insight into what is the risk posture of our various different application systems, the things that we are building and deploying, that is important for being able to not only respond quickly when there is an incident, but also to be more proactive and to get ahead of potential threats and mitigate risk before it's a breach.
Mayor Grace Whittle over at GitLab. Ma'am, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Innovation in Government, DevSecOps, Platform Engineering, Cyber Resilience, and the Future of Mission Delivery, presented by Carahsoft. I hope you learned a thing or two about how your agency can leverage AI, automation, and data intelligence to take DevSecOps to the next level. If you enjoyed this program, check out the archives. Watch all of our Innovation in Government programs on topics like cyber frontlines, scaling open source, or better government experiences. Just head to fedgovtoday.com or the FedGov Today YouTube channel. I'm George Jackson in Reston, Virginia. Have a great day.